For more on the agreement, I'm joined by Farhad Alavi. He's an international law expert and managing partner at Akrivis Law Group. Welcome back to the show. So some major developments since July. Talk to us about Adoption Day. What is it exactly? What does it all mean?
Adoption Day is basically the milestone of 90 days after this agreement was reached, which was July 14th, this past summer. And it's the day on which the parties of this began laying the groundwork for the eventual removal of the sanctions. So on the U.S. and EU side, that requires the issuance of waivers that don't kick in until implementation day, as you mentioned. And on the Iranian side, it requires certain movements in terms of getting the ground ready for limiting the nuclear facilities as stipulated in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
So any complications that you foresee? How soon will Iran really start seeing any benefits from this deal? What will this mean for business, for travel, that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, I think once the deal is implemented, Iran will be perceived as a lot less toxic in the international business community and in the minds of general people, I think, over time. Now, that will take some time, but with that, you're going to see more companies, at least not from the United States necessarily, because there will be a large number of limitations still in place for U.S. companies, but for the rest of the world, they will slowly start coming into the Iranian market, and that in turn will make things like payments easier for imports and exports. It will make shipping and insurance much easier, and that in turn will lead to a cascading effect that will cause the price of goods to go down and arguably bring down transactions costs for general people in Iran. One of the things that's often been said is that goods are widely available in Iran, sure, but due to the many hoops that importers had to go through previously, these goods often came in at a very high price. And many companies and banks, for example, did not even want to touch anything that had anything to do with Iran. That will slowly change, but there will be a delay. And it's not a matter of just somebody, the president or the EU, signing off on any waivers and then in turn everything changing overnight. It will not be an overnight change, but it will be gradual, and there will be some effects for sure.
So are you hearing of companies working already behind the scenes in anticipation of when this will all loosen up?
Absolutely. Many companies, especially outside the United States, are already sending delegations to Iran. They're undergoing studies and determining the feasibility of when and if they can enter the Iranian market. Now, obviously for us in the United States, we're substantially more limited. And the majority of unilateral sanctions that apply to U.S. companies and individuals will remain in place. But indeed, for many companies in places such as Europe and Asia, they are prepared to enter this large market.
What about the Iranian people? When will life get easier for them as they watch all of this taking place right in front of them?
Sure. I think over time, as I said earlier, with more and more Western and Asian companies going into the Iranian marketplace, the field that has been formerly emptied out over the past years because of the sanctions, whether it's been in terms of competition for retail goods, whether it's for logistics services to Iran that get those goods into Iran, those have all been vacated nearly in the past 10 years. Now, with these companies now free to go in, some companies will naturally tread very cautiously, but each one of these entrants will in turn have some effect because it will indeed bring down the cost of transactions. It will make importing into Iran much easier. And that in turn should ideally lead to some lowering of prices and more availability of goods. Now, there have been reports of many consumers in Iran holding off on purchases, waiting for this day to come and for everything to become cheap and plentiful. But I think there will be quite some time before we get to that stage naturally, but it will have an effect, albeit a gradual one.
So many sanctions. You have U.S. sanctions, EU sanctions, UN sanctions. Everyone has something different.
Sure.
Who lifts them first?
Ideally, on implementation day, the EU and U.S. sanctions will be lifted or waived, at least in tandem. The UN Security Council has already issued a new resolution and has effectively repealed its previous resolutions against Iran. That will kick into effect. But ideally, everything's supposed to come in on implementation day, and there will be a period. And again, as I said, I don't expect the companies to all be lined up in queue on implementation day necessarily, but you will see gradually a commencement of activities.
And that is December 31st. 10 seconds. Will they make that date?
It seems that the Iranians are moving ahead of schedule, and that's there's been some concern about that actually. But I believe the U.S. executive branch has been readying for this, and I'm sure the EU has as well. So I see no obstruction.
All right, Farhad Alavi, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insight.